Hello everyone and welcome. This is another League Starter Guide. I know there's a lot of these on YouTube right now and this is another one of these. So I will go over a Berserker Lancing Steel build here. Now I will just be upfront about this. I don't want to sell this build as something it's not. This is not a beginner build. If you are looking for any of the steel skills beginner version, there are better ones out there. I don't know necessarily if it's like the best beginner version, but definitely better than this one. I recommend Don the Crown's champion version. It scales higher and it's a little easier for a beginner to start with because it's more defensive. Just that out of the window, right? I'm not trying to oversell this build. Another thing, it is a Berserker, so some even advanced players might be a little hesitant to play it because Berserkers are usually squishy. Now this version is not, but I will go over that in a little detail later. First I will show you a map. The idea behind this build is that we use Shattering Steel for clear and Lancing Steel for single target. This video is still recorded in 3.16 before Precise Technique is available, without leveled gems, without defense. There's basically no defense in this version of the build because I don't have the gear together. This is just standard stuff that I had lying around, and I bought a quick sword just to have basically the equivalent of a Dream Feather in next patch. So you will already have a better sword than Dream Feather in next patch at this point because this is a tier 16 map, but just to give you an idea. So I will, when I clear, talk about some of the actual weaknesses of this build. So I'm going to start off with weaknesses because, again, I want to be honest here and not sell you this as some, like, you know, big delirious farmer. This build has a few things that every Berserker build has, which is, first off, the degen. We have good recovery thanks to a lot of maximum leech and wall pact, but we do still degen between packs, which means that you don't have your full EHP. So no matter how tanky you make Berserker, when you leap slam into a new pack and you only have 3k health, well, you don't have your full EHP, right? So I don't know why I'm picking this up on standard. You will not have your full EHP. Maybe I will actually mute the game just so you can hear me. So you will not have your full EHP basically at all. So that is something to keep in mind. I will be using a bubbling flask to help with that, which I currently don't have. This is from a different Berserker I had in the past. So just setting expectations there. And it will suffer also a little bit in clear speed. As you saw at the start of a map, before you build up your rage, you're not really that fast. And that is a... whoa, chunking me. That is a problem. Again, this version of the build doesn't have defense yet, because this is pre-patch and I didn't have the gear. The start of the map, you will not really have all of the rage. And that's a problem, because without the rage, you don't have speed, you don't have damage. So that is a struggle, and I will actually share like my solution to that. There is a solution, but just to let you know, like before you get that solution, because it's gear based, the start of a map will not feel super great, and your clear speed overall will not match something like, you know, Corrupting Fever Glad or stuff like that. It's not a top tier clear speed build, but with the Shattering Steel 4-link, it's actually serviceable, and that's really all I'm looking for. So I also forgot about Blood Rage before. It's also not as comfy, so I kind of advertise this as a comfy starter because I like comfy starters, right? I don't really want to do a minion build and have to think about a million things, but it's not as comfy as some other starters I've had in the past that I just started myself. I'm not like a content creator, so you probably wouldn't have seen them, but it's not as comfy as some builds I've played in the past because it has a lot of buttons, but they're still relatively easy. So especially Call of Steel, at first I was very hesitant about it, but it kind of feels like reloading a gun. So I know it's kind of like, you know, it's weird to talk about class fantasy in Path of Exile because it's basically non-existent, but it actually kind of feels cool, but it's definitely up to preference. So I actually end up liking Call of Steel. As I said, it feels like you're reloading a gun, which, you know, not like a gun nut, but it's pretty cool. And if you don't like it, you will not like this build. It's just simple as that. Another thing is the Lancing Steel skill is a little, it lies a little about the DPS it deals, because you're looking at this, and if you looked at the POB already, you saw it's supposed to have 2 million damage. Surely even half of that would be pretty good. Well, the thing is that it scales pretty well in the endgame, but when you're just starting off, you will be getting penalized heavily by enemy armor. I mean heavily, because Lancing Steel has a lot of small hits, and a lot of small hits are currently not that great in this game. Because enemy bosses, especially, but also armored rares, have armor. And armor against small hits is more effective against big hits, and Lancing Steel loses a lot of its damage. So keep that in mind. Now, one thing that will make the clear better in the next patch is the mark on hit support. It is only every 4 seconds that you apply the mark, but that's plenty, because you don't really need help against every rare. It's just, you encounter a rare, you will be attacking it long enough for the mark to proc, and then you will be able to kill it. So that's, that's another thing that will help it in the next patch. As you can see right now, I'm kind of struggling against these abyssal monsters, right? And I have to self-cast the mark, and it's probably going to go on a different mob, because marks are stupid. That's something to consider, but that will be kind of fixed in the next patch. And because armor is so bad, I will actually say, before you get to a decent gear level, where you have like enough gear to clear comfortably, without it, you should be using not Sniper's Mark, but Poacher's Mark, because it gives you an additional source of fizz damage reduction overwhelm. That's a mouthful. So that's another thing to keep in mind. So yeah, this is not a beginner build, because there are still a lot of things to keep in mind, and it's not necessarily that comfy, because yeah, it's not turn your brain off and deal damage kind of build, although it's close to that, but it's not quite there. So keep that in mind. And also, as I said, it's not going to outcompete something like Corrupting Fever or a Wander, a bow build in clear speed. It doesn't attempt to, but just if you're looking for that, keep looking. Or don't, really. There's good build guides already out there, so just play those. But if you are into a build that gets damage for free, that gets speed for free, and that gets pretty decent defense for free, and then can invest to make that into pretty good defense, then look no further, you found it. So that's why I want to share this build, because in the next patch, it will be pretty good. And why do I say that? Well, let's take a look at the path of building. I'm not going to go over every single gearing decision here, because it will end up being a long video then, but I will just go over a few, right? So, how we achieve this, right? How do we achieve a build that's both good on offense and defense? That's not a champion. Well, the other side of that coin is Berserker. We get a shit ton of damage from Berserker. This is something like 100% damage. If I take these off, I'm left with nothing, right? So this is this is actually the unrealistic budget. Let's go back to this one. There we go. This is the setup, right? 2 million DPS with a pretty realistic setup, with Rage and Aspect of Carnage. Aspect of Carnage, little contentious because it has the increased damage taken, but defensively, take a look here. Armor, oh, where did that come from? Guess what? Determination is OP, use it. Defiance Banner, OP, use it. Molten Shell, OP, use it. Specifically, I will say for Molten Shell, this build reaches the 50k threshold. So 50k armor is the threshold for Molten Shell maximum effectiveness. So I just use a level 1 Molten Shell in a cast and damage taken setup, so it doesn't cost too much life. Just 60 life, I think. You can take a look. Yeah, 60 life. And use it on relatively low cast and damage taken, so it procs often. There you go, 75% less damage taken from this. 50k armor on its own, very good. We have also capped Versatile Combatant block. Versatile Combatant is this node down here. Used to be a ascendancy point for Gladiator. That gives you maximum chance to spell block for overcapped chance to block attack damage. How we achieve that is we take these two clusters, with the Shield Mastery and this cluster, and then we also anoint Sanctuary. Sanctuary is here. So that's how we get to 20% block. We do also need some block on the shield. I will be honest about that. The shield will be probably the hardest thing to get, so you're going to ignore the max res until you can afford it. The max res will not be just the Shaper item next patch on 3.17. The shields will be able to get maximum res without being influenced. So that's how we get block, armor, and then we itemize spell suppression as well, because we are iron reflexes, we can use evasion gear and armor evasion gear to get spell suppression. This is the end point. You end at 100% spell suppression. During your gearing, you're not gonna be quite there, right? Because you're not gonna have spell suppression on every piece of gear. But at the point where you reach the, like tier 16s, when you start thinking about, okay, maybe I should start farming these bosses, right? Maybe it's profitable, maybe it's something I should do. You will need spell suppression for that. At that point, you should be able to get cap spell suppression just from gear. That's why we don't use any uniques in the default version. That's why we don't really, fuck around with that too much. We just get spell suppression on the gear. And we do get a little bit from the quartz flask as well, so you have some leeway there in amount of spell suppression. So you have good defense, armor, block, spell suppression. You have good good offense, I should say, and good recovery as well. The recovery is coming from Defy Pain, from Wall Pact, and this wheel down here. Most people usually take Vitality Void, but Vitality Void is actually less, even though it's one less passive point. It's also a lot less leech. It's 400 leech difference, I think, 400 health per second. So that's because these have the maximum total life recovery per second from leech. And while leveling, you also want to take this one, because the total recovery per second from life leech will help you while leveling when you have less damage and you need more leech from a single instance of leech. So I'm not going to explain leech right now because I don't fully understand it yet. I just know what helps at what point, right? So while leveling, pick this up because having more leech from one instance is good. And in the end game, you will have enough from one instance where you want to scale your maximum leech. So you have plenty of defense layers. You have enough to tank Sire's Die Beam. So that's why this is set up to 5,564 if he doesn't crit, which I know you can always get crit. That will happen. I'm a softcore player. I don't care. But this is the single beam, and he does like 6 of them, I believe, in the Die Beam. So you survive this, and you actually reduce it down. Well, I don't know exactly. Yeah, it's you have 66% phys damage reduction against that. So you reduce down to like 2k. So when your Molten Shell pops, 75% of that will also be going there. So you survive a Die Beam. And as far as the actual setup goes, this is realistic setup. I really try not to inflate my numbers in PoB, so I will just explain that, right? I have Rage on. I don't use Berserker, so against bosses we will always be on maximum Rage. When you die and you go back in, that will be painful. I'm not gonna lie. Again, not trying to oversell the build. If you die on a boss and you go back in with 0 Rage, it's gonna take a while before you start doing damage again. Defiance, you saw in the clear, we had some Defiance while clearing. In the past, I played a Berserker in Ultimatum, and the average was 7 Defiance per, like basically up at any point. Because they each have a separate timer of 10 seconds, they drop off after 10 seconds. So I actually very rarely reached 10 Defiance, so even though there is a downside to Defy Pain that I build around, I still didn't really need to, but you still have to, basically. You will have about 5 Defiance, 3 Defiance up at any point in time, just because monsters are hitting you, because we have no evasion, we cannot evade attacks, so you will have Defiance up. It's not unrealistic to have this ticked on, but it's also unrealistic to have 10, because at 10 you lose it. So 5 is a middle ground, and against bosses that hit you a lot, obviously you'll have more. You do have to build around it, I will say that, because at 10 Defiance, take reflected physical damage equal to maximum life, then lose all Defiance. You need over 100% reduced reflected physical damage taken to nullify this. So you need over 100 because you have 10% increased damage taken from here, and you can get shocked, and you can get cursed by vulnerability. So yeah, the build has good defense, it has good also defense against Elemental with this and Molten Shell, although Elemental is still your biggest problem. Even though technically like your EHP against Elemental is higher, I still fear Elemental more than physical, because physical hits usually are not going to be that big, but whereas your physical hits, you will be, you know, if enemy hits you just for 1,000, you reduce it down to 100. So that's nothing. But if enemy hits you with elemental, it's always going to be reduced by the same factor, right? So I still fear elemental more than physical, so I'm not going to oversell the defenses on that front. But you are immune to corrupted blood, you are immune to, well, corrupted blood you need to get on a jewel eventually, but before then you can use it here. You are immune to Maim and Hinder, which is a new map mod. If you're not aware, there is a new map mod that has enemies have a chance to hinder you. I believe it like 28% reduced movement speed, which is horrible. I don't want that, so I'm gonna take it here. You have only a little bit of defense against curses from the flask. Where is it? This one. You could instead get the mastery here for the curse effect, but I don't feel like it's going to be that big of a deal. I'm just going to keep the curse effect the less effect of curses on you. I'm just going to keep it on the flask because sometimes you run into enemies that curse you in a map, but I'm still going to be rolling over curses in map mods. Because I feel like there is no way, like there's no consistent way nowadays to have 100% immunity against curses. Like your own flask can still be depleted, right? I have them ticked on because they're flagellants and we're getting hit constantly, so we basically always have them on, but it's still possible for them to run out. So you don't really, you know, I choose to not rely on curse effect like reduced curse effect. I choose to rely more on mods that you can actually 100% remove, which is you can 100% remove Hinder from existence. You can reduce, you can get rid of Chill, you can get rid of Freeze, you can get rid of Shock. We have all of that figured out. Ignite, we have 70% chance to avoid with the Flask Cup, and normal bleeding we have on the Life Flask. So I try to think of every single thing that can kill you. Obviously, I will still miss some things. There's still like Impale in Simulacrum, right? That's why I said I'm not trying to sell this as a Simulacrum build. This is not a Wave 30 Simulacrum build. Potentially you could do it, I don't know, I will have to try, of course, but probably not. And if you do it, then definitely take the Cannot Be Impaled. Other than that, good, solid build to get you started. It's very realistic. As you can see, even here, I account for the reduced curse effect from the new Mark on Hit support. So this is your actual realistic DPS, and it can scale pretty well. Obviously, like Vogue Gems for Lancing Steel do a lot, because there's 3 that you can use. Greater multiple projectiles, Vicious Proj, and Brutality. So if you have the bank to spend on it, if you have the time and the investment, you can also get, it's an Impale build, so you can get a Watcher's Eye with additional Impales. You can get Lionized Vision if you get enough spell suppression on your other gear pieces. You can use Brass Dome instead if you want extra defense. You can use a Paradoxica, right? You have to get to 212 dexterity, but you can use a Paradoxica. So yeah, pretty good. And overall, just have fun, you know. It's going to clear the Atlas, it's going to kill the bosses, it's going to have a good time, comfortable, don't have to think about too many things. I have notes also in the POB on how to craft the gear. If you are worried about the spell suppression, don't be. It's not the easiest thing in the world, but you will be able to get like 80% spell suppression relatively easily. You will be able to get that with just cobbled together gear on the actual league. So just do some harvest and reroll current mods, much more likely to roll the same mods with higher modifiers, and you will get a good suppression gear relatively easily. Well, not good, but decent. And so that will let you get started on bosses, even though you will still randomly die every now and then because you really want 100% spell suppression. But you will get it eventually. So yeah, the build eventually gets to a point where it's really beastly, but even as it levels, it can really support itself, right? Every gear upgrade that you get is meaningful. Every weapon upgrade, every helmet, body armor, gloves, you can get the new implicit with extra rage, which I'm definitely gonna get. So every gear update is meaningful, which is what I like in builds. If you like that too, this is the build for you, right? If you are looking for something a bit tankier, as I said, there are champion versions out there that are just better. They're just better. I'm not trying to oversell this build. It's gonna lose out to a champion in the end because champion is just busted, right? If you take a busted skill and you pair it up with a busted class, you're gonna get a busted starter build. Berserker is busted, but it's not as busted as Champion. So if you want a better build, go with Champion. But I like Berserker because it gets access to rage faster, it gets the speed, right? When you just enter your first map and you leap slam from the start to the end in 20 seconds, it's the best feeling ever, right? So I just want the speed at the start of the league, that's all. That's why I'm going Berserker. And if I cared more, like if it's like your second build of the league, if you started with something else and now you're looking for something to boss with, go with Champion, right? I'm not gonna promote this build as something it's not. Go with Champion instead. There's plenty of guides out there for Champion Lancing Steel. So yeah, that's it. I'm super excited for the new league, super excited to take on the new Atlas with this build, and super excited to get some Pinnacle bosses. I never really cared about those kind of bosses in the past. That wasn't really anything I shot for, but now that it's basically like exciting, right? Now that there's actual exciting stuff that's not mandatory but good, I'm super excited for the new league. I'm super excited for all the content I'm going to be taking on with this build. I'm not a content creator, I will not be live, so sorry about that. You cannot really ask me questions on stream, but you can ask in the YouTube comment section here, and I will try to answer when I get to it, alright? So have a nice league start, enjoy Siege of the Atlas, and see you later.